So during the video that you're about to watch, I blanked out on who won the Best Actor Oscar for films released in 1993 because I was discussing Anthony Hopkins in The Remains of the Day. Of course, it was Tom Hanks for Philadelphia, the first of his 2 consecutive Best Actor Oscars, the next year being Forrest Gump.
The Remains of the Day is more than one of the best films of the year. Anthony Hopkins' performance is one of the greatest acting achievements ever captured on film. The Remains of the Day, rated PG, at select theaters, starts Friday at additional theaters.
And we're back, like we never left, in the car on election night. We're not going to be talking politics, although the movie that I'm going to be referencing this evening and going into does have a pretty significant political angle, but it's nothing like a presidential election. But welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday election night, here in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. I should be talking about a horror movie with all the darkness and the shadows in the car. But today marks the 31st anniversary of yet another all-time great movie, not just from the 1990s, but from my single favorite movie year of all time, and what I believe is the greatest year that Hollywood has ever had, 1993. Now, yes, 93 had Schindler's List, In the Line of Fire, Groundhog Day, Jurassic Park, Last Action Hero, Matinee, Searching for Bobby Fischer. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Remains of the Day, In the Name of the Father. Just an incredible year for Hollywood from almost the beginning of the year until the very end of the year. Today marks the 31st anniversary of the release in the United States of James Ivory's superlative adaptation of Kaz Ishiguro's best-selling novel, The Remains of the Day. And not so different from The Shawshank Redemption the following year, Remains of the Day is a film that was acknowledged as great when it first landed, more so than Shawshank, I should point out. It got tons of critical acclaim. There were plenty of critics that actually put it above, I forgot Jane Campion's The Piano. I was going to say there were certain people that had The Piano, the Jane Campion film starring Holly Hunter and Sam Neill, as the best film of 1993, over and above Schindler's List. But Remains of the Day got 8 Oscar nominations, including Best Actor for the always incredible Anthony Hopkins. He had, of course, won Best Actor for Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs, a couple of years prior. And it is, if you want to explain Anthony Hopkins, or Sir Tony, as he's informally referred to as, if you want to explain to somebody, if you want to show somebody what it is to be a master thespian, compare Anthony Hopkins' performance in Silence of the Lambs, which was shot probably about 2 to 2.5 years earlier than Remains of the Day. Give or take, it could be 2 years. I don't know the exact numbers. Compare his performance as Hannibal Lecter to his performance as James Stevens in Remains of the Day. It is almost impossible to imagine it's the same actor. And I've said similar things with people such as even Christian Bale. You look at Christian Bale in The Fighter, where I believe he won the Best Supporting Actor award. You look at Christian Bale in American Psycho. You look at him as a child actor in Empire of the Sun. There are some people that, in the right roles, they are capable of such range. And James Stevens and Hannibal Lecter could not be more different in every possible way were it not for the fact that they were both played by Sir Anthony Hopkins. And so Remains of the Day is a movie that does deal with, as I mentioned, with political intrigue. But it's set at what amounts to a manor house, a castle, and a humongous estate in the English countryside. And the terrific old actor James Fox, whose brother Edward Fox was also a very successful actor, and he was in the original The Day of the Jackal in 74 4, I think it was. That was the Fred Zinnemann film, which so many people say is the best of its kind ever made. But James Fox plays the master of this humongous manor house. His name is Darlington, Lord Darlington. So he is connected to the royal family. That's what we're led to believe. Well, no, not that we're, in the world of the film, he's connected to the royal family. Anthony Hopkins plays his head butler, James Stevens. And Emma Thompson plays Miss Kenton, who is kind of in charge of the female staff, because when you have a house and separate homes on the grounds, you have to have an enormous staff to keep everything running. It would be like anything else. And from what we get, James Stevens, and this is why this character connected so strongly with me when I first saw the film at age 20. I struggled with social anxiety disorder. Struggled is an understatement, but we'll just use the word struggled. I had social anxiety disorder. I was incapable of interacting with people in a more or less what would be considered an ordinary or normal fashion. Staring at the ground, can't ever make eye contact. Heaven forbid if it's let's say a young lady I'm attracted to, I'm staring up into space. I start speaking too quickly. I cannot interact properly. Now, the movie doesn't really tell us whether or not James Stevens has an anxiety issue or whether he is simply so tight and so closed off from his emotions, from his feelings, because he has a job to do. And in his estimation, and he explains this very clearly early in the film, his primary, secondary, and tertiary function is to his employer, in this case, Lord Darlington. Everything else, including friendships, love interest, love relationships, it's not really part of his process. He would almost consider it a dereliction of duty if he, for example, acted on a very serious crush that he might have on Emma Thompson's Miss Kenton, or as the days and months and years pile on and they begin to work closer, if he were to even confess that he has fallen in love with her. And the substance of the drama is the fact that these high-level negotiations from the political perspective of what's going to happen, are we going to end up having World War II? There's all that going on, while at the same time, James Stevens and Miss Kenton, they spar, but they spar in a way that indicates great trust, tremendous respect, and what is probably unrequited, unspoken love between them. Now, I have to also point out that one of my all-time favorite people to ever work in the movie business, who ultimately became a tragic figure, Christopher Reeve, outside of Superman 1 and 2, gives his next best performance in this film as a United States Senator who is at Darlington Hall. That's what the manor house is called. He is at Darlington Hall for these, what's supposed to be very high level and very serious negotiations about what will Great Britain's stance be as far as Hitler, and what are we going to do about Eastern Europe? Should we join the fight? Do we need to get the Americans involved any more so than they are? Or is it okay if the Americans stay on the sidelines where there's just a threat that Germany doesn't want them to get involved and Japan doesn't want it? So there's all of these political machinations going on in the film. And Christopher Reeve didn't really have that many roles like this. He did a movie with Morgan Freeman when Morgan was on the rise big time, called Street Smart, where Reeve plays the lead, and he is a newspaper reporter who has dreams of winning a Pulitzer Prize for a kind of hard-hitting expose, and he inadvertently gets involved with Morgan Freeman, who plays a pretty terrifying pimp. And unfortunately for Reeve in that particular film, all we remember is how electrifying and what an incredible talent Morgan Freeman was, and is, obviously. But Christopher Reeve in this film plays this United States Senator who, when he enters these negotiations, he realizes that everybody in the room with him has no business being there. And he gives a speech where he is just to one side of being polite, while at the same time he is shredding the clowns that he is sharing space with, that have no business being involved in this, because World War II might happen either way. And the people that are in the room with him that are actually making decisions and deciding on what actions to take, nobody knows what the hell they're doing. They don't even know which end is up. And Reeve gives a speech on professionalism in a world of amateurs. It is as good in its own way as that iconic moment in Superman 1978, where as Clark Kent / Superman, he is about to tell Lois Lane who he really is, that he really is Superman. He is not the bumbling Daily Planet reporter. He is really from another planet. And then he stops himself just as he's about to tell her. And what he does with his face, what he does with his body language is extraordinary. With his speech, which ends with him raising his glass to the professionals, rivals that. And unfortunately, 1993, as I say, is so stacked, and it was so stacked in every single category, especially Best Supporting Actor, where you had Leonardo DiCaprio for What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Pete Postlethwaite for In the Name of the Father, opposite the always extraordinary Daniel Day-Lewis, and you had Ralph Fiennes in Schindler's List, who very easily could have walked away with the award. You had Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, who ended up winning the award. And then you had, who I thought should have won the award in the last nomination, John Malkovich in The Line of Fire. Well, I will go down on the hill that in any other year, Christopher Reeve gets nominated for supporting actor. That is how fire he is. That is how great he is. And it's a galvanizing performance. Because in a way, he is acting as a Superman. He sees disaster, and these morons are just hurtling headlong towards it. And he needs, you got to get off ramp. We need a fucking detour here. We are all screwed. Or as he says, no one wants war. But then again, we can't afford peace at any price. So while the high-level talks are going on, the political intrigue, the movie gives us a lot to chew on. It deals with the Neville Chamberlain and what was known as the policy of appeasement, which almost literally blew up in England's face. And similar to what Roman Polanski did in the movie The Pianist, without hitting the audience over the head with the idea that the United States took too long to take action. This movie gets into that in a very, almost a subtle, indirect way, that the U.S. has got to do something. England is clearly not capable of defending herself, but also not capable. We don't have the right people here to make these decisions. What the hell are we doing? So, as that kind of side story is playing out, you have, over the time, you have James Stevens in love with Miss Kenton, and incapable, unable, or unwilling, or some combination of all of those, of listening to his heart and following his best angels, which would be for him to tell her the truth. And as somebody who, not that long before seeing this movie, had a disastrous scenario where, and I apologize for being personal here, but I had a crush on a girl, a very long-term crush. It went for an entire school year. I never got up the stones to say anything. She knew that I was attracted to her. I had a green light to talk to her, but I just couldn't do it. I could not overcome the fear. Now, is James Stevens held up by fear? I kind of think he is. The movie leaves that open to interpretation. But the sadness, the idea of people who are not necessarily evil, this movie gets into what you would call the banality of evil, where evil takes on so many different forms. And this film, very clearly, this is not really a spoiler, is arguing against any version of appeasement. That when you have a person or a country taking action which you know is wrong and must be met by a reaction, if instead of reacting, you continue to try to placate the aggressor, eventually it's going to come back and bite you in the ass. On a small scale, person to person, and on an enormous global scale, country to country. And the first time I saw the movie, I was really focused mostly on the interpersonal dynamics between Mr. Stevens and Miss Kenton. But the older I get, and the more times I have watched this incredible film, I mean, it's basically one amazing scene after another, and acting masterclass all around. And a very young Hugh Grant is also terrific in a kind of his character is presented as a bit of a clown, but it's very well acted by Hugh. And, watching him in this movie, his next film, he did 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which is what put him on the map, here in the United States. But you can't placate. And by not taking action, by continuing to appease, again, you have the broad policy of appeasement, and then you have a terrible situation that arises within the world of the story where, because there is a small delegation from Germany, the house has a couple of young servants who are Jewish. And Mr. Stevens is told, you know who's coming, you know the delegation that's about to appear at Darlington Hall. I need you to very gently and as quietly as possible, I need you to let those young women go. And you can see it's written all over Anthony Hopkins' very expressive face, as tight as his character is. But he has these moments where you can see what the great actor does with his body language, what he does with his eyes, what he even does with his hands and with his mouth. You can see that he knows this is not okay. There is no version of this that is in any way acceptable, but he's going to do it. And the argument that he has with Emma Thompson's Miss Kenton, it's heartbreaking because they both agree. They both know that this is wrong. And he's going to do it. Why? Because he's in the service of his employer, and that is his primary, secondary, and tertiary function. Now, there are those that would argue this is the finest performance of Anthony Hopkins' career, and it just wasn't in the cards for him to win the Oscar. In 1993, it's funny, I normally would remember who won. I know that Day-Lewis, I believe, was up for In the Name of the Father. Was Liam Neeson up for Schindler's List? It's funny that I don't remember who won the Best Actor award that year. But it is some of Hopkins' best acting. And I think his character is supposed to be playing slightly younger because his father, Mr. Stevens Sr., is also, at this point in his career, he's an under-butler, and he's starting to struggle with, I mean, it wouldn't be simple tasks for you or I who have never done this for a living, but he's starting to struggle with things that a short time prior were no problem. Just something as simple as vacuuming a rug in a certain room. You and I, we can handle that. But the way that Anthony Hopkins has to deal with his own father, and then when his father takes ill, yes, he wants to, heaven forbid, say goodbye to his father, but duty calls. He has a job to do. He needs to be on call for his employer 24/7. And what he says is, this is another thing that the more you think about, the more it hits. And the older you get, the more that it hits. So it's not just that he has to always do it because this is my job, but he believes that his employer is simply superior to him. And there are moments in the movie where he clearly has an opinion on something and pretends that he doesn't because he doesn't believe that it's his job to ever offer an opinion on the geopolitical spectrum. So he keeps his mouth shut and he lets people drag him, also because he thinks that that's what he's supposed to do. Well, it's not his job description to take abuse from assholes. And it's not his job description to cut himself completely off from having feelings and living life on his own terms. And Hopkins gets all of that across in word, usually not directly, and in gestures. And it's such a beautiful performance. And Emma Thompson, who had won the previous year the Best Actress Award for another film with Anthony Hopkins, another Merchant Ivory production, Howard's End, it's okay. I mean, when I say it's okay, it's a 3 to 3.5 star movie, so I really shouldn't even do it that way. It's better than okay, but I believe that Remains of the Day is the best film that Merchant Ivory ever produced. When I say Merchant, Ismail Merchant was usually the point man as far as running the production. Like, he was the Jerry Bruckheimer, and James Ivory was the filmmaker, you know, the Michael Bay, if you want to go that route. Obviously, they make completely different kinds of movies. But it is such a great film. I know that it's been on Amazon Prime. It's been on Netflix. I think it's streaming free on Tubi. It also could be on Paramount Plus, because Paramount, I believe, also had a hand in the production. This is one of those movies. Yes, it's slow. It's meticulous. It's methodical. But this is the kind of adult-themed, a movie pitched at adults, like the controversy with Clint Eastwood's Juror Number 2, where you have a film that is not a comic book movie. It's not heavy on sex or violence, but it's a movie for an adult audience that is interested in something like that, and not necessarily at the independent level, but at the studio level. Remains of the Day is a beautifully shot film. So many images look like impressionist paintings. It's really something to behold. And if you are the type of individual, if you haven't seen it, yeah, it's 31 years old today. If you have the patience for a 2+ hour film where there's a lot of chatter, but there are so many points, there are so many concepts where it's micro and macro. And there are very few movies that will have similar themes and similar plot points where you say, this is the small version, this is the big version, within the context of the same film. And this is a 10 out of 10 as far as I'm concerned. The critics got this right. It wasn't a huge budget. I think it turned a profit. It probably should have done better. But again, it was such a crazy year for movies. I mean, Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, I want to talk about a guy who could have gotten a Best Actor nomination. Bill got one a decade or so later with Lost in Translation, and was at 2003, and a lot of people thought that he could have won for that. I preferred him in Groundhog Day. But The Remains of the Day, 31 years old today. A great film, and one that is on the kind of overall must-see list. Remains of the Day, produced by Ismail Merchant, directed by James Ivory from the best-selling novel by Kaz Ishoguro, and starring Anthony Hopkins, Emma Thompson, James Fox, and extraordinary, the late, great Christopher Reeve. This has been episode number 350. Wow. Of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this Tuesday, November 5th evening with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.